Just gotta find it. Too many attachments.
I can do it if it's hard to find. Josh knows.
Sorry, I just have too many attachments open. I'll be there in just a second.
Just to let everyone know, Joshua may be interrupting me some today because I'm having some problems with my eyesight. So I might not see raised hands, etc. So just try to roll with it.
Okay, here we go. This meeting of this Festival Climate Action Committee is being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with State of California executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Zoom is being utilized for this meeting. In case of technical issues, meetings will be uploaded to the city website as soon as possible after this meeting. We will be conducting today's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. Committee members, city council members, and staff are participating from remote locations, practicing appropriate social distancing. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting by use of Zoom as noted on the city's website and as noted on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to speak to the Climate Action Committee may do so during public comment or may comment on agenda items during the discussion of each item and must be logged into Zoom. Anyone using abusive, vulgar, offensive, threatening, or harassing language, personal attacks of any kind, or offensive terms that target specific individuals or groups will be muted and removed from the meeting. Please do not abuse this new way to provide public comment. And as a general reminder to members of the committee, let's try not to talk over each other and raise hands and wait turns, all that kind of thing. Great, thanks.
Wow, Joshua, I think you missed your calling as the speed reader at the end of with the legalese at the end of the ad, you know?
Comes in handy every now and then.
All right, Carrie, do you want to do the roll call?
Sure, actually, and let me hold on just a second and let me make sure I get the committee roster up. Okay, so Jerry Glazer. I thought Jerry, oh, he's raising his hand, so he might not have sound yet. All right, but he's here. Alex Goodman. I do not see Alex today. Dina Allen?
Yes.
Joshua Somin?
Yes.
And please, if I mispronounce your name, let me know so I can correct it next time. Kenna Lee? Lisa Pierce?
Here.
Sarah Elliott? I do not see Sarah here yet. Sunali Sikwan? I see Sonali's here. Woody Hastings?
Here.
Diana Rich?
Present.
Luke Lindenbush?
Here.
And Sarah Gurney. I do not see Sarah here today. And that's it.
Thank you so much. And Diana is going to share an inspiration with us today.
Sure, I can do that. Can I please be allowed to share? Screen sharing?
Sorry, you're a co-host, so you should be able to already. It is on the bottom of the screen where the green share button.
All right, can everyone see that? Okay, all right, so these are just some quotes that I pulled out. I see that Jerry is trying to get into the waiting room, by the way. These are some quotes that I pulled out that I thought were particularly applicable to the efforts of this very dedicated committee. So the top one is Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. This group is clearly refusing to be silent about things that matter. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. An important reminder to all of us that we're here to really make sure that what we leave for our children is even better than what they loan to us for our use during this period of our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, No need to have screen sharing when you are asked to present a inspiration. Very casual. Thank you, Diana. Those were wonderful. All right, so reviewing the action items from our previous meeting. I know that Carrie moved forward with the Civic Spark application, working with Tanya, and will be giving us a report of how that has been going. And then another kind of big thing was for the council, the chair group, the facilitation, to figure out what is our process, like what are the process issues. And the chairs and the council members have set a regular time to be meeting to address these kind of process issues. So hopefully that will be one way that we can ease the way of the committee and make things run a little bit easier and have a little more transparency. And then one thing that we do need to bring back to you guys that I don't have in a presentable format at this moment is just a really clear explanation of how we move things forward. So that is still to do, and we should continue. Joshua, are you keeping action items?
Mhm. Yeah.
We'll put that on this week's to,
Okay.
yeah, work on, continue refining. How do we get a project from start to finish? But I think today the funding group is going to provide a good model of kind of how to do that. They've done a great job of getting their item to the agenda and prepared for full discussion on day one. So I think that's going to be helpful to us. Do we have any comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda? I don't see anyone from the public here. Carrie, do you see anyone?
I believe Steve Pierce is here.
Oh, Steve. Hi, Steve. Do you have any comments about things that aren't on the agenda?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. And do we have any statements of conflict of interest by anyone on the committee? And to clarify for all of the members of the committee, one thing that we got some more clarity, or maybe less clarity, but a decision on, is that moving forward, Diana and Sarah will both have a vote on the committee. So that's helpful for us to know when we're talking about quorums and et cetera. So if they're both raising their hand on something, they both have an actual vote. All right, so we're already on to our regular agenda, and that puts Carrie on the spot. She's going to be providing a general plan overview for us.
Sure, and before I get started, because I know we have people from all walks of life here, how many of you have, before the staff report and the links, ever looked at and engaged with the general plan for the city? Okay, so about half of you. So I'm not going to give a comprehensive overview, but we're just real briefly, I kind of compare the general plan to the Constitution, and then the zoning ordinance and the municipal code that falls underneath it is sort of like the big book of statutes that the states and the federal, all the federal laws and acts that are passed. So the general plan for a city, which is a state required document, is a 20 to 30 year range document that looks at a number of technical aspects, like how your circulation, your bicycle, pedestrian, and traffic improvements might happen over time, how you're going to be protecting natural resources, how you're going to be addressing safety, which is obviously a bigger and bigger thing as climate change impacts the different emergencies that we have, but also, and how you accommodate housing growth within a community. So there's a number of state mandated elements. And then there are some optional elements that a community can do. So like we have I think it's called the community vitality section. And I can also share the general plan document. I have it up on my screen if there are any particulars, but we have a community design section. We have an economic vitality section. Those aren't required by the state, but they're things that are important to the city of Sebastopol that we felt, and really, if you think about it, important to write into our Constitution. So it is a guiding document, and when the city, any of its bodies, staff as we're looking at projects. When we move forward with either a particular project, and that might be like a capital improvement plan, like an improvement to a park or sewer system or a street and sidewalks, or adopting policies about like the zero waste policy that worked on in the city was adopted, or the climate emergency resolution. Those need to be consistent with the general plan. And so the general plan itself, the format that it has a bunch of overview, but really the way it works is you have overriding policies under each of the elements. So the land use, circulation, community services, conservation, noise, etc. And then, so those are the overall policies. Those are really the vision of what you're trying to get to. And then there's then it sort of plays down into, those are the goals. And then it plays down into policies that the city is going to look at, and in some cases, specific actions. The city will consider implementing, a revised building ordinance, that addresses soft stories for earthquake protection or something like that. So it can be very specific, but it starts out very broad in terms of the goals for the city. And what I shared with this group, I did share the link to the whole plan. The whole plan is 219 pages or so. It also has an environmental impact report, which is much, much longer, actually, that under California Environmental Quality Act, we need to analyze any impacts, environmental impacts from any action that the city adopts. When you do a general plan, you try to do that comprehensively. That way, when you're implementing any of those policies or actions, it's generally, you have to define that it's consistent with the general plan and exempt because it's already been analyzed as part of that much larger document dating from 2016 in our case, when the council adopted the current general plan. And so, I don't know, and Kenna or others in the group, if there are specific questions about how this group is to be interacting with the general plan, or any questions, I'll just stop at this point. We can go from there.
I think Jerry has his hand up.
Yeah, you might also mention kind of that, Gary, that there's a general plan, or actually a community update that the general plan refers to, that talks about the conditions in the community that are measured. I think the last one was done in 2014, or is there a newer one?
Yeah, so there are some documents that were done. They aren't technically required in doing a general plan, but what we did is we did have a background report. So existing conditions were analyzed, and this was actually a project done in conjunction with Sonoma State University that does provide some additional background. Jerry, is that what you're referring to?
That's what I'm referring to. And I went, since you sent this forward to us, I look at the general plan when somebody asks me a question, because I keep a copy on my shelf right here. I also have one on that iPad. But I was reading one section on a question I think Zeno asked me, and it referred to that update, which I'd never heard of before. And I looked at the update and I go, wait, this actually has numbers inside of it. And those numbers would be useful, and having those numbers updated would be even more useful. And yes, that's what I'm referring to.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So there was a lot of background work that went on before the general plan update was started. And there was a lot of community engagement. I know, even though I didn't work for the city, I went to a few of the general plan workshops that the planning department hosted. And I don't know if any of you went to any of those or not, but that was, we talked about the different elements of what we'd like to see in Sebastopol, and what the larger community vision is in putting together this kind of comprehensive document.
I think Woody has his hand up.
Yeah, just sort of a question around sort of the process in the cycle and where it's at. So it was last updated in 2016. When will it come up for revision again? Or are there other opportunities to amend it if that's needed, that kind of thing?
Sure. So we actually have, in terms of communities general plans, we actually have a very, very up-to-date general plan. A lot of communities are I don't know, I've seen people who are still working off a 1989-ish kind of a plan or a 2009 plan. Usually they're a 20-year document. So our next update is 2035 is when that's sort of scheduled to be done. The only element that requires more frequent, because of state housing law, frequent updates is the housing element. And cities are required to update those either every 4 years, or if they have been compliant with state regulations and whatnot, they can do an 8-year update, which is what the city is on, because we have been submitting our annual reports and working with the HCD in terms of their compliance issues. So that said, 2035 seems like a really long ways away. You can amend a general plan, and actually under state law, you can do you're limited to 5 amendments per year. And that can be as simple as a land use change. So you have an adopted land use map, and every parcel has a, and this is sort of the basis of the zoning ordinance, but every parcel is designated both in the general plan, a land use, and those are more general, like commercial, industrial, residential, downtown. And then they have a zoning, which is, within residential, there's like 7 or 8 different residential zones, depending on where you are in town. And there's three industrial and like 5 different commercial zones. So again, the general designation in the general plan is much broader. But if someone does want to change from, say, a residential to a commercial land use, if it's the land use in the general plan, then that is considered a general plan amendment. We haven't done any general plan amendments in the last couple of years, which is always a good sign, because it means that you did a good job on your general plan and you're following and you're starting to implement that. I do anticipate we'll probably have a couple in the next year, and they will be, related to things like incorporating the local hazard mitigation plan we're working right now into our element. State law also has new requirements that you are required to have a safety section, which we do, and an environmental justice, which can either be a section or a full element itself, or it can be incorporated through each of the documents. So those are sort of larger, broader amendments. So a general plan amendment, all I'm trying to say is, can range from anything from a specific parcel changing land use to a whole new element being added to it or modified.
Thank you. Very good.
Right. And I will say that, there are plenty of actions and policies that might be adopted by the city that aren't specifically mentioned in the general plan. But the goals themselves, I think, are broad enough that, a lot of the work this group is doing are covered. And I specifically attached for your use both the policies that are there, which are more specific, but also the conservation and open space element, which does have a few pretty overriding general plan goals that relate to greenhouse gas reduction and more climate change type issues.
Jerry? Yep.
Yeah, a couple of things. One was, I don't know if we did it or not. I know that when we're doing the zoning for the city to comply with the general plan, that there were areas, there was one specific area where we felt like we were doing spot zoning. And so we asked for a general plan amendment, because the general plan forced the zone to be a certain thing, which ended up looking like spot zoning. I don't know if that was done. That was probably about three years ago.
Yeah, so I came to work for the city after the general plan, and right as council hearings on the zoning ordinance were started. So if you have, I mean, we can talk about this offline too. But
I can't remember.
If there's a specific area, I could probably tell you.
But that was an example. One of the things, and since you sent this, and I actually do read the material that's sent to us. So I went back through the sections that you sent us, and it seems to me for the committee that we ought to look at F1 and F2, because F1 has no actions and virtually no policy associated with it. And something we've been discussing in the energy group. and F2's in pretty much the same basic area, talking about, yeah, thank you. Talking about residential, and what we were concerned about in the energy group was how is it that we reduce the consumption of energy that we have in the built out environment that we have, because we're not going to get a lot of new buildings. So anything that we focus on would probably need to focus on with the built out environment. And here I see in the general plan, we have it identified, but nobody had any actions listed. So it seems like it wasn't fleshed out. I think maybe that's a place that we ought to work at a policy level in the energy group.
Yeah, and certainly there are times when you are just wanting to start looking at something, and so you don't know what the actions are yet, and you simply identify the larger goals, and then as part of the work that the city does, that's how you figure out, well, what does that mean, and what does that mean we should be doing? And that's where this group is sort of a key element to that in terms of the climate issues.
Just one other question to go along with that. So when we're talking about so many amendments a year, we could put a package together of these are the changes we'd like to see in the general plan in order to get more specific about some of the energy policies. And we can put them all together as a single amendment. Is that right?
Well, there's two different ways you could do about it. If it's something that is consistent with the general plan, if like adopting an all electric beach code or something, you don't have to amend the general plan. You can just adopt that policy because it's consistent with your general plan, and now you have an ordinance that does it. I will say, general plan amendments do require, not a bad thing, but it is a longer process. And I know this group has sort of been a little surprised on some of the process requirements that the public, that cities have. But if you were to do an actual amendment, it does need to go through public hearings at the Planning Commission and City Council in order to be adopted. So there's a lot more time added to it, as opposed to if you have a policy and an action you want to take and it's consistent with the goals, you don't need to amend the general plan to do that. You can just, as a city, decide to do that.
Yeah, but it's kind of like executive orders versus something that goes through Congress. If we end up putting it in the general plan, then it's pretty hard to also change and reverse. Whereas, at a council meeting, you can turn around and reverse policy.
Jerry, I would say if the general plan is your constitution, Congress passes loads of rules every year, and yes, they can be changed, but so can the Constitution. But you don't change the Constitution very often because that's really the core vision of what you're doing. So it's not, the reason the state has the number of times you can amend it is because it is supposed to be a guiding document. It does go through review by various state bodies, and people should be able to rely on it. So it's not something you should be changing willy-nilly every year, multiple times. And that's where I think the overall coverage, First Amendment rights, well, that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. You as a community get to decide, or the Supreme Court gets to decide that. When you look at the policies we have, promote energy resource conservation in residential development, what does that mean? Well, that could mean a code update, but it could also be a program to help homeowners, or like subsidizing, or like the Bay Aren water conservation program that the city has initiated with Bay Aren right now. That is actually resource conservation in residential development. We're already doing that.
Luke?
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie, for this. I completely agree with the analogy of how this is our constitution. And I also just want to underscore a little bit that the general plan really, has an extremely robust community process and takes a really long time to produce. So I think in the sense that it is looking over a course of many years, it also takes quite a few years to get this document going. So there's, a lot of cooks in the kitchen that ended up creating this document. And I also just want to say too, since Carrie and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, a lot of it comes down to interpretation. When there's a proposal that moves forward, you could find something in the general plan that maybe supports an action. And then you could also find something else in the general plan sometimes that might support denial of a proposal. So a lot of it is about how it's interpreted. And if there are things that you're excited about reading through, well, first off, I'd just encourage all of us to be really engaged in this document. the conservation element for sure. Every other element, I think, as climate policy really affects all of these areas, it's really worth us taking the time to look at it. And I think anytime each of us are bringing things forward, just having that language of this is something that the city has taken a really long time to think about and prioritizing. And here's, one area that we've identified where this proposal is consistent with this. That can be really helpful just in terms of justifying, why should we prioritize this? And I would also just, encourage working groups to really look at how to apply that. And also, if there are areas where you feel like there are deficiencies, I think it's intended to be an evolving document, but I agree, as Carrie said, that, we're the Climate Action Committee. We're not necessarily the Climate Planning Committee. So I think that, really putting these goals into action, there's not, the blunt truth too is that all of these things are never, going to be accomplished. And the goal is for as many of them possibly to be, and a lot of them are really conceptual as well. So I hope that it can be a source of inspiration for us as we do this work.
And just thank you, Luke, because that was actually, there have been, even as we talked about last night before our planning commission meeting, there have been recent projects, but yeah, they have a conflicting general plan policies. One would support them and one would not. And that's where the council and the planning commission as bodies that take formal action use their discretionary, the thought of what is right for the community, and that's where that goes. I will say the one element we are going to be updating. We did just get proposals. We released an RFP for our housing element update, that one that needs to be on the 8-year cycle. So we are going to be actually starting that later this year. So in terms of getting involved in that, in terms of the Climate Action Committee, I hope that members who are interested in those components of it will engage there in that as well. And last thing, and Joshua, I do see your hand up. One thing that may make sense as we move forward is if we do get a Civic Spark Fellow who does a climate action framework, that may be something that we may want to consider in terms of that's sort of a larger document that could be potentially a general plan amendment to adopt that by reference, just like we do their bicycle plans and those other documents. And so that's something as we move forward we can figure out on that front. Joshua?
Yep, you pretty much just addressed the question I was going to bring up, which is about the proposed relationship between the Climate Action Plan or framework and the general plan, given that we're not apparently shooting for a certified plan, just what that relationship is supposed to look like. If that's a big and open-ended question, I'm not looking to have it thoroughly answered at this point, just so much as a general sense of how the Climate Action Plan or framework is supposed to interact with the general plan in the city's use.
Right, and so there would be some, like I mentioned, the big CEQA, the EIR document, Environmental Impact Report, that was done for the general plan. I don't have any conceptions or preconceptions of what the climate action framework will be. It could be something that is a pretty simple, this is exempt, it's already consistent with our general plan. We're just adopting it into it, which is similar to how we'll be handling the local hazard mitigation plan, which is referred to in the safety element part of the general plan, but is a separate document. So it may be something as simple as that, depending on what is all, what the actual draft climate action plan looks like. There may be some things that require additional environmental review, and I'm happy to just assess that and work with this group over time to see how that evolves.
Thanks.
Jerry, I see your hand. I do want to check to see if anybody else that hasn't spoken up has any questions about this kind of large topic document. Jerry, go ahead.
One of the things that this is just for us as a group, I found it useful looking at this again in light of working on this group rather than on the planning commission. For instance, the section on circulation, and for the transportation group, it would be great for the transportation group to go through and look at the actions that are there and highlight the actions that we think are relevant today and say, okay, let's put those on our list of things we want to be looking at and highlight them because they were thought out before. We wanted to do them. I looked at a couple of them. I said, yeah, why aren't we doing that yet? And I saw the same thing on the housing element and for some of the energy stuff and some other places where I think if we look at what the general plan has and says, well, we want to work on those things because we planned on working on them, that's not a bad place for us to be. Saying, now the general plan was there, thought through, and instead of intuitively thinking we ought to be doing such and such, well, we had a plan. Let's work on part of that plan.
I see your hand, Diana. I have a question really quick, and then we'll go to Diana. That there's some kind of compelling reasons to be using this document. Are there places where committee members and the public can access the document that's not electronic, because it's a long document and sometimes?
So I believe the library has copies of this. And I'm happy to, they have for a lot of city documents, but if not, we can certainly give them a copy of it, that or a couple copies, one reference and one that they can check out or something like that. It's not.
I think that might make it easier for some people. Go ahead, Diana.
Yeah, I have a related comment. We might, as each of these working groups looks at various proposals, consider just as a foundational piece, each group looking at the general plan in order to determine any particular proposal or approach, what is the foundational piece in the general plan that supports that proposal. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you have to peruse through the entire 225-page document, but it might be an easy way to just kind of begin our analysis and make sure that we are anchoring the proposals in a way that makes them more persuasive when they get along to the city council. And then I would have a question of you, and you hear this coming, planning director, to the extent that we have a particular working group and they are working on a particular topic. Would it be acceptable for them to simply email you and say, hey, we're looking at UUT or whatever it is, whatever the topic is, can you kind of give us a starting place in the general plan? Is that something you'd be comfortable with, Carrie, that you think would be?
Sure. Yeah, that's certainly part of my role, planning director. Is, when someone proposes a project, that's kind of one of the first things I have, a private development project. Well, wait a second, you're asking to do, a residential in the middle of an industrial zone. Does that make sense? Let's take a further look at that. And, some places it might, and some places it might not. So that's what I'm here for, as that resource.
And as a general example, for instance, Sonali, you looked at, the Wonderful Art Project. I'm sure there's something in the general plan that would support that project regarding environment and community and engagement. And so I think
art in our community, actually. Yeah, you're right.
And then you have, then you can put that reference point in there and you have even more ammunition for it. Thanks.
All right. Any more questions about the general plan or how it relates to our committee's work? Or go ahead, Joshua.
Carrie, perhaps you're going to get to this later, but you mentioned the issue of interpretation with respect to different sections of the general plan may suggest different things with respect to proposals, and how that would happen. I feel like I heard some mention of maybe an example or a little bit more on how that works out when something comes up that's ambiguous.
Sure. So I can give you a couple of examples in planning, in private development proposals that we've recently had, and also real quick, I can kind of actually go through what a proposal from this group and how I would be looking at it. So in the past, we've had, in our general plan, we have policies related to economic vitality that talk about supporting local businesses and the local tourism industry. We have a couple policies there. I won't mention the specific policies. It'll take me too long to find. But on the other side of it, we have policies that in the housing element about preserving existing housing stock. Well, we had a proposal for a non-hosted vacation rental, which would have converted a single family home to a full-time vacation rental come before our planning commission and city council, and the ultimate, so those are two conflicting. So one would support local tourism, the other is you're losing a piece of your housing stock. And Sebastopol only creates about 8 to 20 new units per year. So every, when you think, well, it's only one unit, yeah, but we're only creating 8 to 20 units per year. So every unit counts, in my mind, at least. And ultimately, the planning commission wanted some clarification. They did approve it, but it was appealed. The city council looked at those policies and ultimately decided that it was not consistent with the housing element. And even though it was consistent with the tourism policies, they felt the housing element and preserving existing housing stock was more important and denied that. And then actually now we have a moratorium on non-hosted rentals. It will be expiring this summer, but because we require planning commission approval, we have discretion over those full-time. We're a staff telling people, no, you're not gonna get approval for this because it's not consistent with our housing element, and we're just not able to approve those. We had a similar thing where we had a local business owner, Benedetti, Mark Reese at Benedetti, more recently wanting to add a car wash to their lot and do some other things there. But so that was supporting local businesses versus a car-centric use in the downtown core. And so those were, again, conflicting. Ultimately, it was approved, I think mostly because it's basically infill to the existing site of a long-established tire center, and that's not going anywhere. So, and then the last one I'll do, just so you might see how it could apply to this group. So, this is actually promote resource conservation and residential development. And so if you were to say, let's adopt the code, a electric code that requires people to retrofit their existing single family home upon sale, or their existing, okay, so that would obviously be very, very expensive to take an existing single family home, knock out the natural gas and convert it to all electric, replacing furnaces and water heaters and all that kind of stuff. Well, technically that would be consistent with this, energy conservation and residential development and greenhouse gas ones. But then we also have policies related to removing governmental constraints that affect housing production or housing the affordability. And so that would be contrary to that policy. And, obviously what where the committee went with it was new construction, because that's not as much of a cost issue as, requiring a retrofit of existing buildings. So in terms of what this group is doing, and I know that's why we came back and said, wait a second, we want to make sure that the policy that you're supporting makes sense. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation now about the general plan, but you can kind of see where how you craft the policy even can be done in a way that it respects multiple parts of the general plan.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really informative for me being in.
Yeah. And I don't expect you to be experts. That's why I'm here.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments regarding the general plan, or questions for Carrie? Oh, Diana, your hand's up.
Yes, I'd just like to make sure that Carrie puts on her to-do list following up with the library to see if they have a copy, and if not, providing them with one and letting us know. Thanks.
I will do that. Thanks.
All right, so we're ready to move on to the funding group and the utility users tax.
Anna, really quick, I think we just need to take public comment on the item.
Oh, thank you. Steve, what do you got to say?
No comment on that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. All right, now we're ready to move on to the funding group and the UUT proposal.
Thank you. And hopefully my internet will hold up. I'll try to pay attention to whether or not people are freezing on my screen and whatnot. So thank you. This item is coming to you from the funding group, which is myself and Lisa Pierce. And Steve Pierce is joining us today as he's been looking at this issue for a long time and has been participating with Lisa and me on working through it. And so, you know, as I go through this, you know, Lisa and Steve, if I get anything wrong or you want to chime in on anything, feel free. So in your agenda packet, the proposal is in there. And also we did fill out, or at least take a first cut at filling out the equity assessment. And if you haven't had time to review all that yet, it's okay. This is an introductory informational item. We're not asking for the committee to take any action today. We will, however, we do have some questions for staff, so some follow-up activity to move it forward. So this is something that several of us have been looking at for a number of years. It gets a little wonky weedy, you know, something called utility users tax is probably something makes it pretty obvious. It's not for the faint of heart. Anyway, what is a utility users tax? It's a tax imposed by a city on the consumption of utility services, and that includes, but it's not limited to, electricity, gas, water, sewer, telephone, sanitation, cable TV, those kinds of things. The rate of the tax and the use of its revenues are determined by the city that's instituting the tax. The tax is levied on consumers of the utility services and collected by the utility as part of its regular billing procedure. So in this case, that's PG&E, because we're talking here about the gas and electricity utility, not all those other ones. And then it's remitted to the city. So it kind of goes into an escrow fund and then it's sent to the city afterward, after it's collected. The proposal, the proposal our proposal is to place a measure on the 2022 ballot to reauthorize and increase the Sebastopol utility user tax to fund climate action. So Sebastopol currently does have a UUT. It's set to expire in 2024. The 2021 budget estimate is that the tax rate will raise by the end of this year about $650,000. And so again, the proposal would be to reauthorize it with the ballot measure, local ballot measure beyond 2024 and increase it marginally to help pay for climate action. So it would be increasing that rate marginally for natural gas and electricity from the current 3.75% to a percentage that is not, we're not proposing a specific number. We think there's more questions that need to be answered before we arrive at how much it might be raised. So the increase in the UUT for climate would follow the City of Albany's model. The City of Albany adopted a similar increase to fund climate action in 2020. The Climate Action Committee would recommend during each budget cycle how the proceeds should be spent. And the City Council is not legally obligated to abide by the committee's recommendation or to even spend the funds on climate action. You know, that would require a 2/3 vote. But we will ask each city council member to affirm that the intent of the measure is that funds raised would be spent on climate action. And I think, you know, it would be up to a vigilant constituency to ensure that the monies are spent on climate smart endeavors. We recognize that such a tax is inherently problematic from an equity perspective. So if we're going to pursue this, we need to maximize policies that can mitigate impacts to vulnerable utility users. The UUT does have an inbuilt safeguard that, you know, CARE-FARE, those are the special rates for qualified low-income customers. CARE-FARE customers are not required to pay the tax. We've got a proposal in there around possibly, and this is one of the questions for staff and the city council, is around having some kind of opportunity for folks who are facing any kind of financial hardship to be able to apply for an exemption, even if they're not a qualified CareFair customer. So again, we prepared the initial equity assessment using our assessment tool that's in the meeting packet. We see that as just a starting point, and multiple stakeholders should be included in the discussion. And then the questions, some of the questions we had for the staff also in the packet, providing the 2019 and 2020 UUT revenue. And question is around, can we break out gas and electricity? The 2008 UUT ballot measure had an estimate for the expected average monthly tax for residential and commercial customers. And so wondering what the current estimated average monthly tax is for residential and commercial customers. And if the staff could provide the number of residential and commercial accounts that would be subject to the UUT. That's pretty much what I had in terms of the presentation. Steve and Lisa, anything you want to add or anything I missed of importance?
I think you covered it. Thanks.
So I guess open to questions, comments, and concerns. Oh, I see hands. I see Diana first.
Actually,
should I be the one to, should I facilitate the questions, or should someone else do that? And
I think it's fine for you to go ahead and just call on people for questions.
Okay, Diana.
that's fine. I'm happy to respond, but actually Jerry did have his hand up first, just saying.
Oh, did he? I'm sorry.
Go, Jerry.
Doesn't matter if I go second or first. You answered the first question, which when I was reading the material, I couldn't figure out how it would take, it was going to take 12 weeks to finish the analysis, and you bring it to us now, and I'm going, you can't make it by August. So it's for next year. One of the things is this, if June's company finally gets back to me with a quote, I won't pay a tax. And so one of the questions I have is this, and this has to do with equity. Is it possible to apply a tax for the connection that is a fixed charge as opposed to against the amount of consumption? The reason for that is as more and more well-off people end up adding solar to their projects, their homes, the burden of the tax will land on those who can't afford solar or are renting and don't have solar. And it seems to me it would be equitable for me to pay something as opposed to nothing. So is that possible to do? Is that something you can look into?
So I think that would be one of those questions we would add to our little basket of questions for staff around applying a fixed charge. And that would be, Jerry, is the idea it would be applied to a certain class, or people would have an option of going for a fixed charge or a...
No, I think, you might leave the tax where it is and then add a connection tax.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Okay.
So, and I can actually address that. I can answer that right now.
I have for you. And you brought this up about gas versus electric. And can the taxes be differentiated between the two? Because clearly we want less gas, and so maybe the tax is higher on gas than it is on electric as part of the motivation.
Yeah, that would be good, and that's been a difficult thing because the PG&E doesn't break them out. So and it would take a lot. That's been something that's been explored, and it's be really difficult to make that happen. But Kari, I think you had some direct answer to.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of complexities with this. One is a connection goes through PG&E, not the city at all. So a gas or electric connection has nothing to do with the city. So I'm not quite sure how that works. The other is under state law. I think what you're suggesting is what would be considered a development impact fee. We have connection charges for water and sewer, and when you develop a new house or a change the use of business or build a new commercial building, they're subject to development impact fees. Under state law, there needs to be a nexus done to the impact of, what is the impact that the new development is creating. So like, it's easy to see a traffic impact fee or a park impact fee when residences are new people are going to be using parks. They're also going to be driving the roads, etc. But to structure it as a tax for that is legally, I think, difficult, and I'd have to talk to the city attorney about something like that.
You might look closer at it, Carrie. I mean, I spent days taking classes on schedules, and I get the very long bill, like an 18-page utility bill for my house with all the details on it. And one of the charges PG&E charges every month is there's charges for connecting to PG&E. So it's one of the things they have in their schedules. And maybe we can apply the tax against that as opposed to the consumption. And that would help us with the equity issue. And
so being connected to the grid tax kind of a thing, instead of the actual amount you, okay. So that's a different question. That would probably doesn't have the same issue.
Yeah, and I think we got that question. So maybe let's move to Diana, and then I see your hand up, Luke. So Diana first.
Yeah, this comes at this proposal, and the discussion here it's very timely. The city is going through budget discussions. They're very involved. So there's a couple of kind of red flags that I just want everyone here to be aware of. And there's also a positive move forward that I think creates an opportunity for this topic to be a part of a bigger discussion. So the budget situation is dire. It's sobering, to say the least. We have a proposed budget that hasn't been finalized, that has us dipping in this next fiscal year about 1.25 million into reserves. Last fiscal year, it was about 1 million, and the year before that, about 1 million. We are looking at, in terms of our unallocated reserves, just our reserve fund that hasn't been set aside for anything else. It's just our safety net, kind of like a personal living expenses safety net. We're looking at that going down at the end of this next fiscal year to about 1.6 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but when you have a $10 million budget with 3 years running, dipping in $1 million or more, it's not much money. So we do have additional, there's about 6 million that we can get into if necessary, and I expect we will have to, that has been set aside for vehicle replacement, infrastructure, and importantly, retirement. But nonetheless, the kind of safety net is being depleted rather rapidly. However, one of the things that's going on is the city has proposed, tentatively set aside a $30,000 amount. It'll probably go up in these next discussions for a consultant to look at increasing strategies for increasing our revenue. And one of the topics will be the UUT. It's up to expire, and so definitely the city will be looking at how we could increase that UUT, keep in mind that, increasing it at all. I looked at the Albany UUT, it's at 6 or 7%, I think. That's pretty high. So in this environment of economic pressures on individuals and concerns about equity, our consultant will be looking at how much we can comfortably, given our population and their economic issues, increase that UUT. But bottom line for me is this is a great opportunity for this committee to be involved in discussions about what that additional UUT might be allocated toward. I will tell you that at the moment it's in the general fund. So just as a foundational piece, budget issues, looking at UUT anyway, think that this committee needs to be part of that discussion and get deep into it and pursue it with staff support. And finally, as a separate issue, but I see it coming forward, to the extent that there's a need for money for climate action, maybe there's a need for this committee to be asking itself, what sort of money do we need? What sort of money is needed to develop a fund to support climate action? because that's ultimately the question that will be asked, the justification. What is needed and how much? Thanks.
Okay, Luke, you're up. Thank you, Diana.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say first, thank you to the funding committee for bringing this forward. I think Councilmember Rich addressed a lot of my considerations. So thank you, Diana, as well, for all of your work on the budget and for thinking about the budget and where we're at with it. I think that generating new sources of revenue for climate action and for the city in general is of paramount importance for all of us to be considering. I just want to mark as well that everything I'm mentioning, I think, is coming from a perspective that we're at a place that's really early with this. That I think it's good to recognize that we might have more questions than answers, and it's good to be asking questions about how we can, when we're generating revenue, do it in the way that is most equitable. And I do think that we need to look more at ways in this tax at proactively exempting low-income ratepayers. I think that there is often sort of it can be put out there that low-income individuals can opt out or find exemptions, and navigating that maze of our city website or just of paying bills in general. Low-income people, low-income renters, low-income ratepayers simply don't have the time to be navigating those mazes when they already have so many mazes to be navigating in every other area of life. So I think just being as proactive as possible, engaging wherever else the city has ratepayers that might have been gaining assistance from the city, whether that's facilitated through the city or through nonprofit partners. I think that we need to just really be thinking about how we can be as intentional as possible at making sure that we're not adversely affecting our most vulnerable community members as we go through this. Of course, that's not a reason to not move forward with it. I just think it's something that should be answered. So I guess my question next would just be what the process would look like from now until getting it on the ballot. And I would just say that I think that there should be a study session, ideally at the City Council, to have that community engagement, really get it out to the public so everybody knows well ahead of time that this is going to be on the ballot, so they can have the confidence to, vote or not vote for it, however they do. And I also would just like to know if there needs to be any funding earmarked in the budget. I guess I wrote that down, but I think Councilmember Rich did address it. But just in terms of being able to do an economic analysis and really understanding how much revenue we're going to generate, how much of that can be allocated to climate action, how much of it might be able to go elsewhere in the city's reserves. So thank you.
Thanks, Luke. I just want to make one point about funding for climate action. And it speaks to what you both just said, Luke and Diana. I mean, I think that funding for climate action is not necessarily an either or thing between climate action and other needs, community needs in the city. So, you can do all kinds of things that meet basic needs that are climate smart, providing clean emission transportation for folks that don't own a car. So things like that. EV, bus that circulated around is, I think, a good example of, something that, monies could be spent on that kind of thing that, sort of address both climate concerns as well as things that you might want to address with funds out of the general fund. So I just wanted to touch on that. But any other questions, thoughts, comments? And I also wanted to say, Luke, thanks for bringing up the issue of what's the process, how to get it on the ballot. That was one of our big questions, and I don't know that we ended up putting it in the actually in the proposal and as one of the questions. I think we did have some suggestions for steps to take, and it didn't end up being in there. Jerry, I see your hand.
Yeah, just a suggestion, something that Luke said. If you look at the PG&E bills and how they do that, I believe they have preferential billing for low income. And maybe that's one of the things to check into. And then if whatever the scale is on the percentage of any one of the items that PG&E has on their bill or Sonoma Clean Power has on their bill, then you might already be discounting for disadvantaged community since they'll already have a preferential rate. This would be a rate against the preferential rate.
Right, yeah, that would be the Carefera customers, they're qualified low-income customers, and so if that's, sounds like that's what you're talking about. Uh-oh, everybody's freezing, I think.
I have my hand up, Woody. Should I talk?
Oh, okay, you know what? It's hard to see. It's sort of the same color as your window. Go ahead.
Yeah, everything's hard to see today. So I just had a question when I'm listening to you guys talk about the equity issues involved with UUT, which does, I'm not saying it's not a good idea. I'm wondering if you guys have also been looking at a real estate transfer tax, which is a more kind of progressive tax in some ways. And, you know, I know when I lived in Berkeley, I paid my real estate transfer taxes on my house, and then I could get half of it back for earthquake retrofits. And, you know, have we looked at the idea of a transfer tax that you could get, that would be a way of, you know, providing money for climate retrofits, but still some revenue for the city as well.
I mean,
Yeah, and I think Diana could answer that, but I think the city, in terms of the municipal consultant, hasn't had that person on board. But I kind of agree with you. The real estate transfer tax. I had lived in Oakland for a while when I sold my property. That was just, you know, it's the nice thing is if it's a percentage, then the more wealthy you are, the more in house wealthy when you sell that, then that hits you more than lower income who are in more affordable housing. Yeah.
I thought I saw something that showed our rate, and we had a fairly high rate here in Sebastopol for that. A lot of other things we charge very little for. No?
so we've got some hands up here, Jerry. I've got, I think Diana, you already had your hand up and spoke. I think Lisa is next.
I do still have a question, but let's go to Lisa.
Oh, yeah, let's go to Lisa and then I'll come back to you, Diana.
Yeah, I know Steve could talk about the transfer tax issue as well, but it's a wonderfully equitable way to tax. You know, people who have homes in Sebastopol who are selling now are making a lot of money. Prices have gone up so much. So it's a way to get money without hurting people too much. It does require that the city become a charter city, which many cities are, and it's not a very complicated process to achieve. But right now, we're kind of limited with not being a charter city with what the, I believe is what the county, is that right, Steve? That different cities have different rates for transfer of property taxes, and ours is still quite low, actually. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, only Santa Rosa and Petaluma are charter cities in the county, and they have a rate of $2 per thousand of sale. And every city that's not a charter city, everybody else is at $1.10 per thousand, including in the county, outside of cities.
So let's keep on track here. Go back to Diana. If we was that it for you, Lisa? Did you have anything more?
That's it.
Okay, Diana.
Yeah, just want to confirm that yes, these various ideas are definitely on the list to be considered by the consultant. It'll probably take a couple months to get that consultant lined up. There is definitely an expectation that a UUT will be pursued and put before the voters, because otherwise it expires. So I think we can expect that to happen. And I think all these ideas are going to be considered. I also want to comment, because I don't think the rest of you were at the city council meeting, that Steve Pierce was quite eloquent in presenting these ideas to the city council in a very organized way. So that message is being reiterated, and I encourage anyone who wants to attend the city council to again reiterate it, to go ahead and do that, because those comments are heard. Thanks.
I guess I'll just add that, you know, yes, the funding group is you know, taking things one at a time, and real estate transfer tax is one of them that we want to look at, and just sort of taking it step by step. So any other comments, questions, concerns? You
Just
again,
quickly,
Diana?
Woody.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, this is really a question for Carrie. As I look at the questions that are coming up here, who do you think, it's always so useful for this group to have someone come and present who, knows what they're talking about on a topic. That's one of the benefits of having you here on any of the planning issues. If we wanted to bring someone from staff to one of these meetings, assuming the committee was interested, to kind of, describe what's the UUT timeline, what is it really all that involved to become a charter city, those topics. Would that be a Larry McLaughlin city manager question, or Anna?
I suspect, well, the charter city question is definitely the city attorney type question. And I do know that does need to be ratified and go to a vote of the full voters. Yeah. So that's a ballot initiative in a way, basically, that the council would presume put on. But what that all means and how complex that is, the timeline for that, that would be I suspect something for the city attorney. In terms of the municipal finance questions, like the taxes, what's allowed and what's not, that's usually why the municipal finance consultant, because it's not something you necessarily know as a finance director or as a city attorney. If you're in city attorney world, there's a lot of different specialties. In the municipal law, there's land use law, there's government finance, there's all sorts of things, and so I don't know if that would be a consultant or if that's something that we would have that knowledge in-house.
Got it. Okay, so then I'm sorry, Kenna, when is the next quarterly report out? I'm just trying to figure out next steps here. Do you know?
From this committee to council is August. I don't have the date.
So just one thing that this committee might consider is including some comments regarding the committee's opinion and suggestions regarding a UT at the August report out. I can certainly, as a city council member, commit to keeping the committee informed on timelines regarding the financial assessment from the consultant that will involve the UUT discussion. So just in terms of next steps, I'm happy to do that part.
I have a question for, I guess, Diana and Carrie, as well as the funding group, is how, so we have, the council is obviously looking at these things. You're hiring a consultant to look at these things. The funding group is looking at it. And how can we best work together without duplicating a lot of work? Like, I don't want Steve and Lisa and Woody out there doing a ton of stuff that we're paying a consultant to do. So how can we best coordinate our funding group with the efforts that are already in place with the city, so that we're not duplicating work or creating a lot of redundancy? Go ahead, Lisa.
It does seem really important for us to meet with this, if we get this fellow, to meet with this person and go over what we already have found out and what the questions are we have. There may need some direction, in that way. This is maybe kind of a young person. So
I think, just to clarify, I think the consultant they're talking about is a separate than our Civic Spark fellow.
Correct. It would be a professional in municipal finance. Yeah, so they would be the expert in the room on the.
You're right. Thank you very much. I forgot. Yeah, it does seem like a meeting would be really important.
Yeah, and I will say, because obviously a specialist consultant like that can be quite expensive, I anticipate that normally they would work directly with city council. So I think it would, and Diana, thank you for offering to keep this group abreast of when those items come to council, because it's a lot of moving parts for me. But I think in coming to those meetings at city council and expressing the desires and the goals of the climate committee would be a great way of having impact, and as Diana expressed before regarding the budget, having active members come to city council meetings and express positive steps that the city can take is extremely valuable. And that can be in written form as well, but written form if you have something really detailed, and then using your 3 minutes to sort of summarize it, as Steve Pierce did recently, is an excellent way of doing that, I think.
And then having the questions really well thought out in advance for the consultant. So we're making efficient use of the time.
I'd like to ask a question, if I may, because the questions, we have questions that I think should be able to be answered by city staff now, because there's internal knowledge about the UUT, and there's an existing, audit. And so some of our questions are just about where things are at now with the UUT. So is it possible that we not have to wait all the way till August 3rd or beyond to get some of the answers to some of the questions?
Yeah, and Woody, if you're referring to the 3 questions you have on page 2 of your report.
Yeah, there's those 3 questions. And then I think there might be a handful that have come up today that are answerable now, that we don't need to wait for a consultant.
Yeah, so I would say, Woody, the best way for that is probably if you can take those 3 questions and add in and send an email with any additional questions that came up today. And you can go ahead and send it to me, or me and Diana. I can get it to the city manager to, I'm not sure who the city manager and finance director to answer some of those questions. I will note the finance director is working on the budgets right now, so she will not have time, and I don't think her staff will have time for the next month or so while that is under the adoption process. This is, as they say, budget season for her. But I think some of those are pretty easy, like the revenues, the question about revenues and the number of accounts subject to the UUT. Those should be pretty easy reports for them to pull up on.
Good, very good. Thank you so much. So we'll get those questions to you.
Great, thanks.
Diana, did you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted, as this committee is learning how to use its available resources, to reinforce the fact that when you're looking for information of this kind, that would be in the city's documents, in the city's records, I really feel that every working group should feel free to put those questions into an email and forward them, whatever protocol the facilitators want to use, but forward them through Kenna or directly to Carrie. You guys need to sort out the protocol, but the staff is available through Carrie to answer those questions. And so that seems like, I just want you all to know that the staff is there. You have questions, organize them, make sure they're direct, don't expect an immediate answer, send them to Carrie. I mean, these questions in the future, Woody, you could have simply sent them. If you have those sort of questions, or the committee, the working group comes up with more, just send them to Carrie and she will do her best to get them answered by the appropriate people. Carrie, does that seem any modification? Am I misspeaking there?
No, I think that's fine. And obviously, if you have a bunch of questions, it's a lot easier to get them all in one email than so that when someone's doing those reports. And so that's appreciated, Woody, by collecting those for this. But yes, you don't need to necessarily wait for a meeting if you have questions for staff.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Any comments from the public regarding the UUT beyond what we've already had?
And if I just want to add one more thing, if you do have questions, if you could just make sure that, if you can include that, questions for staff on blank or whatever it is in the title subject line of it, that way it'll be easier to kind of just see it and figure out who it needs to go to if it's not myself.
All right.
I'm sorry, Kenna, if you wouldn't mind, if people do that, do you want them to CC you as one of the facilitators as kind of a monitoring piece or not?
Yeah, it actually is good for to have that CC. So if you remember to do it, please throw me on as a CC. I promise not to answer you. So moving on to our next working group reports. Are there any working groups that have a report out that they would like to make at this time? Go ahead.
Diana, did you?
Go, Woody.
Which one, Diana or me? It looked,
Woody,
all right.
go ahead.
I'll just report that, yeah, thanks. I mean, I'll just report, I guess, that some of the transportation group met. That was me and Luke. Alex was not able to be there. And we talked about a number of things. The one that I want to report on is that we did talk about wanting to get the issue of prohibition of gas stations onto the Sebastopol City Council agenda. So that's somewhat in the works, and I believe that Carrie is working on looking at that, working on that, and I know it's being discussed among a number of cities now. And just sort of in terms of sort of an announcement, I learned recently that on July 12th, the Regional Climate Protection Authority will be sharing information with all the member jurisdictions, all the 9 cities and the county that make up the RCPA, suggestion, recommendation to evaluate imposing a prohibition on new gas stations. So that was one of the items we talked about. Luke, I know we talked about other stuff, so if you wanted to chime in with anything from that committee.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I would just also say this is sort of peripherally related to the Transportation Committee, but just what's going on with the city right now, in addition to the budget hearings. The City Council is reviewing the capital improvement plan in regard to the budget. I'm not sure if this might have come up last time, but the second hearing of that will be on, I believe, July 6th. And then the Planning Commission will be reviewing the continuance of that item as it pertains to the general plan elements on July 13th. So if anyone's interested in joining those meetings, that does have a lot of elements in regard to transportation, but also there's a ton of items in there in terms of that generally just directly pertain to the work of the Climate Action Committee. So I would just recommend anyone who's interested in that, it's over the next 5 years, just looking at the capital improvements that the city's going to make, and a lot of really interesting information in there.
So Luke, would you be interested in doing a report for the next meeting on what's going on there?
As long as that's appropriate for my ability to participate in the Planning Commission hearing, I definitely would be happy to.
Yes, you are the designated Planning Commission liaison to this group, so I think that's very appropriate.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to do it next time or report out after the Planning Commission hearing as well.
Great. Any other working groups? Diana, did you have something to report?
Not on the working groups, just wanted to report out that the upcycled art project did get entered into the proposed budget as a tentative line item at $3,500.
Yay. So just for everybody to know, we are going to be adding onto our regular agenda, recurring agenda items, council reports, so that we make sure to have a little space for those kinds of updates. Any other working groups that want to report out at this time?
Can I just ask a question from the perspective of the equity group? Which is, I believe that the open seats, the reopened application process for the open seat that included the equity seat, that closed on June 15th, if I'm correct.
My understanding is that they're extending the deadlines. Do you know, Carrie or Diana?
Oh boy, Carrie, do you know?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is, I thought that the open seats for this committee, including the equity seat, had already been extended one time for a 2-week period to June 15th, and that they're now closed. I mean, I guess the bottom line for me is that it just seems to me like those seats, if possible, if the council would see this as the way to go, to just have that application
opened until filled.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that would be a change in policy for council. That is something that council would need to discuss. I believe, and I was actually just trying to look up the our city council forecast, which is not a public document. We use it for knowing when our staff reports are due to, and how many other items, agenda management type things. I believe there's going to be a little bit of discussion on committees, a committee structure at some point in a couple months with the city council. That's maybe something that could be included, or the next time there are interviews. One of the pending items we also have is the term limits for this group, which it sounds like the recommendation from the group in general is 2 years. So that needs to be approved as a regular agenda item by council. I don't know. I mean, I know our city clerk likes to keep the process the same for all committees, but obviously it's ultimately council's decision, I believe, on how they operate. But they are going to have a discussion on standing versus ad hoc committees. And I think this group in Zero Waste sort of, the confusion surrounding them brought to light that, council needs to give some direction on this.
Diana?
Yes, I am looking at the website. The city website still shows the deadline for the Climate Action Committee slots as expiring on June 15, but I have an email from Mary Gurley dated June 21 that says that the deadline will be extended.
Okay.
So that plan is already in place, and that's the case, I think, for the other open positions. I note also that there is apparently one application received for the Climate Action Committee open positions.
Right, and I believe that was for the business category. If I see the applications as they come in.
Okay, what I will do, Carrie, let's join forces to figure out what the extension is, and to make sure the city website is updated to reflect that extended deadline.
So I think even though clearly council needs to, figure out what the official thing is, these extensions are possible, and that the intent is to fill the seat so that we can recruit people. If we have ongoing recruiting efforts until the seat is filled, those are still valid. And then we would need to work out with kind of application deadline issues. Is that fair going forward if we're trying to recruit in the community, which I know Woody is doing and I'm doing, to say that, we'll figure it out, please just apply.
Yeah, I think assume that it's still available and open, and obviously if we haven't received applications, it will continue to be open. And so I would say definitely continue to recruit, and generally I think the extension is a 2 weeks, so it may be another 2-week extension that was done. And I will, I'm looking through my emails right now because it's my staff that has to repost and do all this stuff. So I'm trying to look through my emails right now to see if I can find when it was extended to. And if I can before the end of this meeting, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Thanks so much. It's all sounding really good. Thank you.
Any other working group reports before we move on to chair reports? Or any comments from the public regarding the working group reports? All right, so I will move on to the chair reports. Number one is if any of you have any photos of Sebastopol climate actions, even if they're not that recent, if they are Sebastopol and they have climate actions, this week is the final week for photos for the website. And I think the outreach committee was hoping to take this on, but maybe didn't understand, or at least I know I didn't communicate to them kind of the deadlines that we were working under in terms of getting those photos up. So if we have any photos that would be appropriate for the website, can you please send them to me and CC Carrie this week? So just look through your files tonight and send them on, so we can get something that's representing the climate work, because so much has been done in Sebastopol. Number two was the open seats. So we still do have the open seats. Youth members are welcome to apply, and there is a simplified application now for youth members, so it's a lot easier for them to apply. We have the environmental justice seat still open, and the business seat is still open, though it sounds like we at least have an application for filling that one. So keep spreading the word. And then we do have, as was mentioned previously, a city council report coming up in August. So as the working groups are meeting, if there are things that we're going to want to include in that report or questions that we'd like to bring to council that are for council as opposed to for staff, it would be good to get them on the agenda for one of the July meetings. So we have 2 meetings in July prior to that city council report. So if there's things that you would like to have included, please get them to us so we can get them on the agendas for the July meetings so that we can then report them out. And if there's anyone who would like to take on that August report out, I'm always willing to do it, but I'm always thrilled if there's more voices in the room. So anybody who feels inspired or willing to present to council, just let me know. And that's it for my reports. Does anybody else from the facilitation group have any reports for the committee? All right, so I think we're ending on time.
So can I do, sorry, if I had my hand raised, but it's probably the same color as my background. I just wanted to give a quick update to the group on the CivicSpark application. I met with Tanya Naris yesterday. We went through the draft application, finished it up and submitted it. And we've already gotten a response from the CivicSpark folks. And we have a meeting set with them next Tuesday to talk about our application. So that and the letter of support that council passed and the mayor signed have been sent on. And so that project hopefully will know soon.
Hey, thank you so much, Carrie. That was a lot of work that Carrie did on that. So really appreciate it because I know you're busy. Joshua?
Yeah, just a couple of brief comments from the chairing front. In terms of action items for the next round, mostly those are just for the chair working group, which is to say we're going to attempt to come to some write-up of a basic process outline for how things are supposed to work in the Climate Action Committee and share that with everyone. On a related note, I am going to be typing up action items and just sort of basic summaries of votes taken under the meetings and sending those to Carrie in lieu of formal minutes for the meetings. We'll at least have a record of what we voted on, what were the action items for the next meeting. As mentioned previously, the chair committee has also got an ongoing meeting now with the city council members in terms of just a general steering and process check-in. And finally, just to say for everybody that on the action item front, we have a 3-week gap now between this meeting and our next full committee meeting. So it's kind of just a good time to get back together with your working groups and use a bit of that extra time to catch up and advance any of your working group items, since we have an extra week in the gap in this calendar schedule. So that's not, just a suggestion.
Thanks. Thanks, Joshua. And when you send me the minutes, can you also CC Rebecca, my admin assistant, since she does the posting work? Great, thanks.
All right. Well, I believe that unless we have any comments from the public regarding anything that was said in the last moments here, we can adjourn this meeting until 3 weeks from today because we have an extra Wednesday coming up, thankfully.
All right, and happy solstice, everybody.
Which so that means
yes.
you have a week and a half. You have 2 weeks to get us agenda items instead of the usual week. All right. Thank you
Thanks
so
all.
much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.